Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're going to be starting the webinar shortly. Um, if you want to introduce yourself using a Q&A, we should have that open. Just tell us where you teach and what language you teach, where you're joining us from. And thank you for coming today. We'll start in a few minutes. Thank you. We have Hugo from Franklin Lakes, New Jersey. Thank you for joining us. Kailani from Queen Creek High School in Arizona. Thank you. And Rosemary from Housatonic Valley Regional High in Connecticut. Thank you for coming today. All Spanish teachers, it looks like so far. Just give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Hi, Shirley, joining us from Maine. Thank you. We have another Spanish teacher from DC, Victoria. Thank you for coming. Right. Well, I think that we should get started because we have a lot to share and I want to make sure we have time to cover everything. So I wanted to say thank you and thank you for joining us today. I'm Adam Veldhuis. I'm the marketing manager for world languages at Savvis Learning Company. This session is going to be recorded. It will be made available on demand, and it will be made available to all who attended and registered by email afterwards. So thank you for joining us live. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. We will pause to answer questions occasionally during the webinar. If you have something you'd like to ask or submit to us, or any comments that you'd like to make on what Rich is presenting during the webinar, please use the Q&A on a Zoom panel to submit a question or comment. Comments are fine, even in Q&A. We are very excited to get the webinar started by our presenter, Rich Sayers. Rich has been involved in world languages education since 1978. He taught Spanish at Niwot High School in Colorado for 18 years and also served as department chair and district foreign language coordinator. Rich is also one of the co-authors of the Spanish language program from Savvis called Auténtico, and Realidades, if you're familiar with that as well. It's my pleasure to now introduce Rich Sayers. Rich, go ahead.
Thank you, Adam. I am very pleased to be able to share this with you today. I want to talk about the goals, and that'll give you a little bit of the background of why I went to Adam about a month and a half ago and say, hey, what if we did this? So we want to explore today resources related to Dia de los Muertos. Now, I know for many of us Spanish teachers, especially if you have a large population of students from Mexico, students that live here, generations living here, this is such a huge celebration for them. But beyond just this individual holiday, I want to use this holiday and this celebration to help us think about how is it that we investigate the world, whatever that would be culturally, with our Spanish students. How can we get our students to recognize and explore perspectives? And how can we then communicate ideas about other cultures and also have them explore their own culture? So really use this as kind of a foundation for that whole concept of intercultural perspectives. Now, some of the theory, and believe me, I love seeing theory every now and then because it kind of just puts, kind of crystallizes some of the things that we understand from our standards and that we do every day. This is one that I like because it has a really cool graphic on the left-hand side. I just took some of the keywords and put on the right so that it'd be a little bit easier to understand. But basically what it's talking about is if we're wanting to develop that cultural global competence, it begins first of all with having our students investigate the world. That means a lot of just exploring culture, making observations, posing questions, but then starting to look for those perspectives. And that means with our students, and I know sometimes this can be a challenge, asking them to have an open mind, getting them to examine and analyze, But then we want to start pairing communication and culture, having them listen, having them share their ideas, perhaps engage in discourse. And then finally, there might be a step of take action. Is there something that they use the evidence that they've been gaining to solve a problem, to act with respect? That's a big part of it. A second one that many of you may be familiar with, this has been around, as you can see, for a few years. I think it's just incredible because, again, nice to have a little acronym here, the image model. But again, the idea behind this is that we can begin with some kind of an image or something visual. That could be a video, it could be any number of types of things that our students get to interact with. From that, they can make those observations that we just saw in the other example. Again, analysis is always a key part, just thinking through, analyzing. Then it's really cool that the G of this is to generate some kind of a hypothesis. In other words, what do I think about that? What might be going on? And that's the starting place of that perspective. And then exploring those perspectives and reflecting further. So these are two great examples for us to follow. And you can see there's a lot of overlap between the two. Now, what I want to really spend a lot of my time doing is using resources. But again, all the resources don't come from me. Many of you have resources. And so that's why here are a couple of things that I'm going to prompt you with right now. And as Adam already said, use that chat feature. He's going to be monitoring that as I'm talking, so that then we can pause at different points and hear what kinds of things you might be saying to us. So first, what resources do you use to help students explore Dia de los Muertos and develop intercultural perspectives? So what are you currently using in your class, or what have you used? It might be interesting to find out what levels of Spanish you use these with, because what you might do with a middle school or level 1 class could be quite different from a level 3, an advanced placement class or something like that. So that might be an interesting thing. And then finally, as we show you things, we always love to hear like, oh, wow, I love that resource. I can start using that in the next 10 days or something like that. That might also be really helpful. So feel free to chat any of those in. All right. We're going to start first by showing an authentic video. The authentic video that we're going to show comes from our Auténtico program, and Adam already identified. I'm one of the authors of that. Very happy to represent that program. When we are using an authentic video with our students, that background knowledge experience, that antes de ver experience, is extremely important for us to use. So we want to make a personal connection with our students. Now, there's a couple of ways that we could approach this if we're thinking about Dia de los Muertos. We could go very general and just say Dia de los Muertos is a great community festival celebration. So it could be that we just kind of say anything like, ¿Qué fiesta tradicional se celebra en tu comunidad? So then maybe students aren't necessarily thinking of this time of year. They're maybe thinking of something around the 4th of July or Labor Day or whatever that might be, okay? And then, of course, we want them to talk about themselves. Y participan ustedes en la celebración. Or we can take this cute little photo here on the left-hand side, and maybe there is a huge celebration in your community at this time of year, maybe centered around Halloween, and that's what they want to do. But whatever it is, the starting place, if we're going to talk about what another culture does around some event, and that's where the authentic video is going to take us, is to make sure that our students have some personal connection as they start. So that's kind of step number 1. Step number 2 is when we are going into the use of an authentic video, we need to recognize that there's often cultural background that our students may or may not know. So we might want to start with a question like, ¿Qué sabes sobre el Día de los Muertos? And I do like to start with this question. I don't like to assume when I walk into this that I have to provide all the cultural background. What if we have students who know some of that already? Let's have them provide that and then maybe just add to it. Now, this happens to be a note that we put in the teacher's edition of Auténtico, and I think it's real critical whenever we're talking about Dia de los Muertos, and that is that this could potentially be a real sensitive topic. Could be sensitive because a student in our class or several students in our class may have lost a classmate. They may have lost a family member, whatever. So just talking about la muerte at this particular time could be very difficult. So we want to be very sensitive to that. It could be that certain religious situations could then make that be that we need to be very careful with that. So I love that we're reminding teachers that as fun as it might be to explore this cultural experience, we need to think about those things in advance. Now, if our students need background or we want to provide background, this happens to be one of the little cultural readings that we have within Auténtico, where we might give them information on what is El Día de los Muertos. All right, food like el pan de muertos, with this fun little thing where it's often made in the form of a skeleton or a calavera. People putting up altares en sus casas, that providing that information. And what is the altar? Picnics in the cemetery. Again, students may have heard about something like that. So all these kinds of things may be things that we want to provide as cultural background before we ever start to kind of get into the particular festival. Now, in this case, students probably have heard a lot about El Día de los Muertos, but other cultural things may be newer to them. Now, another great starting place when using an authentic video is that the visual aspect is so powerful for them. And remember those models that we looked at before: observe, explore, pose questions. Sometimes the best way to do that is to do that with no audio, so that they're using those visual powers and maybe are not stressing at all, like, oh, I'm not getting certain words or something like that. So if we let them just do that visually, that may be one of the strengths. So how about showing the video, but the first time turning the audio off and letting them just watch, and then they can make their observations or prepare questions or begin to think about what they're saying. So let's do, now this would not be the entire video. That would be a long, for me, because this video in its entirety is a little over 3 minutes. That would be a long time to just sit and not have any sound go on. And I think you could accomplish in a much shorter amount of time the same goal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put take my audio off, and we're going to do just like we would with our classroom. So again, if you're not hearing audio, that's what we intend. Okay, so then we want to then have our students be able to kind of express themselves as far as some of the things that they saw. And I don't think in a short amount of time like that, I don't know that they necessarily needed to be writing. As a matter of fact, I wanted them watching, but I might then say, take a piece of paper, and I might provide some sentence frames. I found, especially with beginning level students, it was always good to remind them of simple things that they had been learning since the first chapters of Spanish 1, to be able to ask a question like, ¿qué es? Is something that they saw. Or to be able to make a simple sentence like I, or es, or son, or tienen, get them started with something like this. They may need at this point to have a few vocabulary words, because maybe calavera hasn't been a part of your vocabulary up to this point, or el defunto, or la muerte. So that would be appropriate at that particular point. And then have them begin to talk about some of that, because what you're doing in having them begin to share some of these cultural observations, you're also helping them to get ready to listen, because they've seen some things and now they're going to go into a listening mode. And when they go into the listening mode, that's more like what we would normally think that we do during a video. We're going to ask and answer some questions. We maybe are going to make predictions. So at this point, before we go in, we say, okay, so that's really interesting. We've seen some cultural type things. We're going to learn more. But let's get ready now to listen and really be able to understand. So then we might look at the title over here, and we might say, Calaveras de Azúcar, Tradición Mexicana. And at that point, we would point out that many of them had seen that part of what they were doing culturally was making all these calaveras. And did they realize that was azúcar, that was being used there? So that just by looking at the subtitle there, that would help them. They might ask questions about what they're going to see. And it's something like, comen las calaveras? So then do they go on and eat the calaveras? That might be something that they think it's going to all be about. Or they might make predictions. Los niños comen las calaveras de azúcar or whatever. And then the idea is if they've made some predictions or thought about things that they might see, part of the goal is watch the video now and then confirm some predictions. So I'm going to start the video. You're going to get a little bit of a repetition of what you just saw, but I'll take it a little bit further because it is actually very, very interesting. I didn't know some of the things until I had watched this video the first, second, and third time of how interesting this is. So I'll let it play a little bit further just because I think we all share a common interest here.
En la celebración de Día de Muertos, alrededor de la República Mexicana, las personas acostumbran festejar a sus difuntos con distintos homenajes. En las casas montan una ofrenda para demostrarles que siguen presentes más allá de la muerte. En los altares, ¿quién no reconoce las famosas calaveras de azúcar? Es así como nos adentramos en la historia de una empresa 100% mexicana que desde hace 14 años, con un proceso artesanal, se dedica a la elaboración de calaveras de azúcar.
Esto es familiar, por parte de la familia de mi esposo. Mi esposo lo inicia, pero después él se retira y ya me quedo yo con el negocio. Sigo adelante porque me gusta. Es una entrada de dinero.
Con la firme idea de seguir conservando las tradiciones mexicanas, Patricia Pastor Gil, dueña de la microempresa Calaveras Patty, convirtió su casa ubicada en una colonia de la delegación Iztapalapa en su centro de producción. Contó a El Universal que decidió invertir 50,000 pesos para tomar las riendas de su negocio y poner el nombre de México.
Okay, so we're about halfway into the video. You can see at that point, of course, we could continue to watch that, but we want to get into some of the other cultural type things that are there. But based upon that, now, first of all, I was just showing you that because I assume most of our attendees today understand Spanish and can follow that. If I were doing this in class, whoops, I'm sorry, I got a little bit of a glitch there. Didn't mean to have that, so I'll get this off of there. Here we go. Not sure what happened there on my slides. All right, so if I were doing this in the class, it would be more like this. I would play a portion, I would pause, I might go back and replay that if I felt that that was going to be helpful to the students. The other thing that I didn't do here, but if I were doing this with my class, Auténtico using this allows for the ability to have closed captioning. That might be something that would really be helpful to our students to be able to read that. Maybe the first time seeing the closed captions, then maybe listening to it without. So those might be some things that we would do, but then I would stop and I would have kind of a dialogue with the students. ¿Qué está haciendo el señor? And they could look and they say, está haciendo calaveras de azúcar. All right. I could use cierto falso statements. Those are always really good to bring in with our students. ¿Está haciendo calaveras de papel? No, de azúcar. I'm not sure how far we got here, but it's very interesting to note. Well, I do think she said it, but maybe we didn't pick it up the first time. Es una empresa de la familia. I think as it goes later into it, she talks about how many. That's actually a very small family-run company. The students would obviously know, sí, hacen las decoraciones a mano. So all those kinds of things would be very interesting. But that's how we would then do that kind of interaction with that authentic video for them to be able to learn more about that as they go through listening to that. Now, I'm going to come back in just a moment and talk about how the use of this authentic video could then be followed up to the students having other comprehension activities, but I'm going to pause on that for just a moment. Now, let's see here, Adam, I think, sorry. All right, before we get into the stations activity, and this is what may have happened to me before, let me go back to that slide that I had at the beginning. And what we were going to ask you to do, we had this up, and we asked the question, what resources do you use? Maybe what levels? And then which resources that I've shown might you be interested in using? So Adam, let me turn it over to you and see what kinds of things had come from our teachers today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rich. And thank you, everybody, for jumping in and leaving comments for us. Somebody mentioned that they would share a scene from the movie Coco. And,
fun.
Also use images to compare, similarities or differences between Halloween and Dia de los Muertos at the Spanish Honors 4 level. And then somebody else mentioned that, while we focus on the Mexican celebration of Dia de los Muertos, that there are, students from other countries who, might also be offended that they are not, they're not recognizing, right? It's being assumed that they celebrate Dia de los Muertos in the same way as they might in Mexico. And so that's another consideration that should be made beforehand.
Actually, that's a really good point, Adam. I saw once a list of different websites that would say, how is Dia de los Muertos celebrated, like in some of the South American countries and so forth? It's not that it doesn't exist. It certainly exists, but many of the things that we're showing may not be the way of celebrating. So that might actually be a really good thing to introduce to our students to help them understand that there are common holidays across many of the Spanish-speaking countries, but it doesn't mean that everybody celebrates them in the same way, just like not all food in the Spanish-speaking countries is the same. So that's a really good understanding to bring up with our students.
Totally agree. I'll send it back to you, Rich.
All right, great. Thank you. And I apologize. I'm getting in and out of my slides. I didn't mean to do this, but I just getting over that little glitch that I had. All right. Now I want to share with you this next part. So I'm going to show you just a moment the source of this thing that I call a stations activity. I'm not going to claim it for my own, but the idea behind a stations activity is that sometimes with certain cultural celebrations and explorations, it might be good to kind of put the students in groups in which they function kind of as stations. And then the goal is that they're going to do maybe a little bit more of a project type presentation and then show that as the cultural outcome. So this on the left-hand side that you see here is a potential cultural outcome. I'm not saying it's the only one that could be done for Dia de los Muertos. As a matter of fact, in just a moment, I'm going to show you a number of different resources. You might say, wow, for my Spanish 1 class, I might just use one of those resources and call it a day. Perfect. I totally understand that. But I think during a year of Spanish study, maybe every once in a while, we do something lengthier where we go a little bit deeper, and this might be an approach that we take. So in this particular case, I might say to my class, en el video dicen que las personas tienen la costumbre de montar altares para demostrar a los difuntos que siguen presentes más allá de la muerte. Compara lo que hacen en México para recordar a los muertos con lo que hace tu familia u otras personas de comunidad. So you notice here that one of the things, and I am going to talk about, that idea of Halloween and Day of the Dead, but I might broaden this. I might, especially since I taught a lot of level 3 classes, level 4 classes, I might want to take this just a little bit culturally deeper in this way and have our students think about this, and that many cultures do something to celebrate and remember those who have gone before. So this idea came from this activity, I should say, came from the California World Language Curriculum Framework. And their suggestion was to do this. You as the teacher would select in advance a variety of resources. You see a list that I have here, video, art, text, and so forth. And then you would create a station, each station having one resource and something that the students would do in that. And then the students would form groups. And then you just have to mathematically make that work out. And then they would move from station to station. It could be on different days. It could be that they get 2 or 3 stations in one day. Again, that all depends on the amount of time you have, the level of difficulty, and so forth. And then there would be some task that they would have, but they would be viewing, recording, and then all of that is going to be used for some final presentation. Now, because reflection on cultural observations and perspectives is so important, I highly recommend that you come up with some way of having them reflect on that and keeping those. Now, back in the day, for me, it was a spiral notebook. We had culture notebooks that we used, and then we would have our students record that. Maybe like in Auténtico, you have a digital notebook, and maybe they're doing some of their recording there, and then that it's automatically saving them. Maybe you create some T-charts, and maybe there's 2 topics that you're having them compare, or maybe it's just some kind of other graphic organizer, like the one at the bottom, observaciones, preguntas, comparaciones. But the point is, they are going to need a little bit of help, a little bit of structure to come up with what this is in order for that to function for them. Now, remember again, as I go into these, think again, there's an image. From that, we ask our students to make observations and analyze information. We want them to come up with some kind of a perspective or a hypothesis about a perspective and then explore them further. All right, so let's take the one that was just suggested just a moment ago. This could be done as early as Spanish 1, because again, assuming you're providing some of the vocabulary, we would use a Venn diagram. And many of you probably do something like this, where it could be Halloween, it could be Dia de los Muertos, and then they put on the 2 sides the things that are kind of unique to that, but then they put in the middle, like La Muerte, Calaveras, they put where they would have some overlap. So again, we're asking them to consider various places, individuals. Good thing is, it could be a great time of collaborating and sharing ideas with their classmates, and of course, it can lead to some kind of a summary. Now, if I were pursuing that idea that I said earlier, I might take that same idea of a Venn diagram, but I might change the question to ¿Qué hacen las diferentes personas para recordar a los muertos? And so maybe then it's mi familia. What's something that we do? Do we remember the birthday of a grandparent who maybe has gone before? What might happen in another country? What things might there be in common? So that again could explore a different level of culture among this. Now, I was doing a workshop one time with a group of teachers, and they said, oh, my kids, they just roll their eyes when I talk to them about doing a Venn diagram. Well, the Venn diagram in and of itself is such a useful thing, because you're basically looking for those unique things and those overlaps of culture. So maybe they just need it in a different way. So one, maybe you could use something like Lucid that you see on the left-hand side, and then just create the Venn diagram with a different look. Maybe it doesn't even look like that did before, but I love the 2 things on the right-hand side that came from teachers' classrooms, where maybe you bring in some hula hoops. Maybe the one you have at this station, a couple of hula hoops, and they make little cards and they put them there. So it's just varying it, making a little bit more kinesthetic. Or maybe the hula hoops are actually on your whiteboard and they go in and they write there. So again, just make the activity a little bit more hands-on. They're still getting the great cultural comparisons out of it. You may find, and I was thinking earlier, I was preparing for this, I was going to say, so maybe in the upper elementary grades and the middle grades, but I'm thinking, wow, I taught high school, and the high school kids used to also love to do things that were art-like. So maybe what you do is an activity like this, where you provide for them maybe this image, easy to find, just Googling things like this, and then I give them a set of directions, like crea tu propia calavera para celebrar el Dia de los Muertos. This would be a great one, following the video that we watched, where they begin to understand how they're done with decorations, different types of things, or maybe you've done some kind of a reading. Maybe you've explored some of the times where they would poke fun of political people and so forth. So they have some kind of a background that they bring into it. It's not just an art project. So then they're going to do their own with lápices de colores, pinturas, whatever you would choose to have them do. Recorta la calavera. Maybe put it on to a stick of some kind. But the key thing is, then what would you do with that? You might have them describe that. You might have them talk about what they did, why, who the person was. So in other words, they could become that type of thing, do that type of thing also. Here's one, and if you want, go ahead and just take a picture of this. But you will get the recording of this, so you can find out later. This, I think I just Googled this one day, and I was totally amazed at this site. And it really ends up being an authentic site because it's all about how to hacer un altar de muertos en tu propia casa. And it walks you through. So I only put a couple of the partes here, but it would walk you through, and it gives you background on this. It helps you understand it. And now, I'm not saying necessarily that you would take it as far as having the students build their own altar, but it definitely helps them understand, like, oh, this is what they're doing. This would be the parts of the altar. This is why they would be doing that. So it really gets into the background of celebrating that person that they're remembering in that case. So this is a great site. I never got to use it in my classroom, but if I were ever back teaching Spanish again, this would be one of the things that I would want to use, because, and again, I've only shown you a couple of the things that come out of that. So please investigate that on your own. Here's one that's easy, and you can get so much mileage just out of photos. Now, over on the left-hand side, that happens to be one that we have in our Auténtico book. So take advantage. I mean, look in your own textbooks. If you use textbooks in your classes, look at your own textbook and say, wow, is there a photo that I could just use? I was amazed one time when I realized how often in my hurrying through a textbook, I did all the different activities and things like that, and sometimes ignored some of the beautiful photos and some of the rich cultural type things that were there. So stop at some point and have your students look at them. But then the other three photos here, so let me tell you a little bit of a story here. I have a friend, Dan Battisti, and he and another one of my friends, Patty, often go to Mexico City for the Dia de los Muertos celebration. So I'm Facebook friends with him. So these are three that he's posted just within the last few days of being there. And one, he's an excellent photographer. I told him I would mention his name. People can look him up, and maybe he's not even, his background is a language teacher. So it wasn't that he was a professional photographer, but you can tell that he really is. But it's one thing to just bring the photos in, but how do we use the photos? So then I think with lower level classes, the way we would use them is that we would ask questions, and those questions help them to begin to make some of those observations, reflections, analyze, and so forth. Like, ¿cómo se visten las personas? Well, I would hope they would notice how beautiful, how elaborate all of this. I mean, this was serious business, some of these people. ¿Cómo se maquillan las caras? All right. So again, very interesting that it's often referring to la calavera, la muerte. ¿Qué están haciendo? Isn't it interesting that you often have these people, but it's also el baile, la música, all of those things come together. And then, ¿qué impresión te da? I would want this to come out because it's not necessarily the impression of scary zombies and things like that, but it's very family oriented. Those are the kinds of things that I'm going to want to pull out of my students for them to be able to see. If you were doing the same type of thing with your upper level Spanish students, I would suggest maybe turning it around. And my co-author, Peggy Boyles, mentioned this in a podcast that we did with Adam. And that is, she said, how about having the students ask the questions? How about having the students create the questions like, ¿por qué? Or that type of thing, because then if you have your upper level students asking questions, you're still getting at the same things, but now it's them generating the trying to understand. So it's just a slight twist on something, but again, great way to get them into the thoughts behind some of these beautiful things. All right. Now, first of all, before I go into this, I don't work for Target. Okay. But some of my money definitely goes to Target because of buying things for our grandchildren. And my wife and I were there one day, and we were walking down this aisle, and I stopped because I saw this photograph over here on the left-hand side of Luis Pinto. And he is an artist. And then I started realizing, like, wow, Target carries all of these interesting things, art, handicrafts that are represented of Dia de los Muertos. So now I think I might be especially interested to bring some of these in, and then I might want to ask some questions again, like, ¿qué representan? qué colores usa, because I would love to bring up the fact that I am wanting them to see the bright colors, not just the blacks and grays and very somber type things. Again, ¿qué impresión te dan? But I think it might be interesting to talk about ¿dónde venden las obras de arte? Again, I'm not trying to get my students to go to Target. I just want to say, isn't it interesting now that in many of our Targets, these are the things that are being sold? And ¿quiénes la compran? Is it only a Spanish-speaking portion of our population that's going, or has there become a greater interest in the celebration? So that might be another thing that would be very interesting for our students to explore, how this custom has now become so much more prevalent in the United States. And I know many of you are writing yourself a note to check out Target. You better get there soon, because we don't know how many of these things will still be left. Now, I mentioned before, we were using that authentic video. Now, within Auténtico, we help you out to go to that next step. So you'll notice that this is a worksheet. It's there within our program in print and digital, and it's called Después de ver el video. So here you could use this type of thing. And in this station, where maybe you had done the video with the entire class, but then as they're doing their station activity, one station is to watch the video again for more of the fine details. So like here, they have a word bank. Notice that right underneath the sentence. Los mexicanos acostumbran, and then they have to say, would that be festejar? Would that be difuntos? They're going to choose festejar. A sus, and that type of thing. So they would do this. But then I love also the Roman numeral 2, presentación, resumir en tus propias palabras, describe cómo es la empresa de Patricia Pastor Gil. I think it's fascinating. We could go off on another tangent here, that this woman is quite the empresaria. She really has kind of taken what had been a family business and is keeping it going, keeping it growing, all that type of thing, which could get into another interesting topic that we might have there. Here's one that some teachers have told me that they do, and I'm glad to kind of promote this. So there is a reader called Tumba. Its author is Myra Kenyon. Myra and I used to be teachers in the same school district here in Colorado, and she was using the Realidades program at that time. This also works for Auténtico because she's very creative in her writing ability, but she integrates cultural ideas. And so what she did was she wrote a reader that could be used by Spanish 1 teachers called Tumba, and it has a lot of basic vocabulary and cognates. It's a lot of the vocabulary that's included in the first level of Auténtico and Realidades, but wow, most of you would teach that in any Spanish 1 class. This happens to have a teacher's manual. It has a print and an audiobook that goes with it, but it would be the kind of thing, again, if I were using it in the stations activity, maybe we had done the reading of Tumba together, because it would take a little bit of time for the students to get through the reading. And then maybe one of the stations would be for them to do some kind of a reaction or some kind of a next step to the story, or whatever that would happen to be. So again, if that sounds interesting to you, I put her site down there, myracanyon.com, and you'll see this reader and the other ones that she's done. But that might be another fun thing to do related to Dia de los Muertos, because again, one of the things that I like about what Myra has done is to include a lot of cultural information into her stories. Another thing that we include in Auténtico that is very fun, and that is that we use what we call Mapa Global Interactivo, which is the use of Google Earth within our program. And you could then explore with your class something that's going on. So you're going to see this begin to happen here. So you would leave wherever you are in your classroom right now, and you would zoom in to some place that you're choosing. Now, the little box that you see there within the map is what I put over on the right-hand side. So it gives you some information that you might be using with your students, like you might be saying, nosotros vamos al Panteón Civil de Dolores. Es el cementerio más grande de toda Latinoamérica. All right. And then you might talk about this, and you might talk about the fact that en el Día de los Muertos, muchas personas van al cementerio para tener una celebración con su familia, tal vez un picnic, that type of thing. And so they could actually see themselves going into this and seeing a part of it is very large. So they're only seeing a portion of it as this is. But then based on some of the things that they have been exploring, we could ask them the ¿Qué piensas? Question that you see down here. I would probably focus on number 2, which is en el Día de los Muertos, ¿qué puedes ver? ¿Qué hacen las personas? And again, they might be having to use their imagination a little bit because that's not what we see right now. But they've been studying that. They've been hearing about that. And so they could conjecture what might happen. A great way, again, to hypothesize what takes place there. But again, connecting it to a real place in the Spanish-speaking world via Google Earth. Now, I'm going to mention this for our Realidades en Auténtico teachers who are currently using Savvis Realize. This is one of the cool things about the digital platform that we have. It allows you to create a playlist. I actually did this for myself as I was preparing for this webinar, and I started gathering all of these different sites, and many of them were digital and so forth. And I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to keep track of these? Well, within our platform, it allows you to go in and create a playlist, just like you would maybe do for music, and then start putting those different resources there. Hacer un altar de muertos, you heard me talk about that. Some of the resources that came right from Auténtico, like the workbook activity, that calavera art thing, that might have been something that I got somewhere and then adapted to my own activity. But then I've organized them all. And once I've organized, I have different options. I could just use them for my own instruction. I could use them for that stations activity. I could assign them to students so that digitally they have them. And I could also, if you notice on the right-hand side, I could also share that playlist with my colleagues so that they could then celebrate in a similar type way. So that's just one of the features of Auténtico that I think a lot of teachers are now recognizing is really helping them to either explore a custom like this, a cultural celebration like Dia de los Muertos, or just plain old week 1 of the instruction of a particular thematic unit, whatever that would happen to be. So I said this could be a stations activity. So what happens when we get to the end of this stations activity if we've decided? Now, again, keep in mind what I said. You didn't have to do the whole thing. You could have just used a couple of resources, had a great time with your class, moved on to the next things that you have. But if you wanted to do this, then you would take all of their experiences, all of those things that they had been reflecting on and putting it on their different sheets and so forth. And then you would say, how might you use this? How might you take action? Well, what if they thought about members of the communities that they've been meeting all over? And what if they were coming here to our community or experiencing what we as a family experience or something like that? So then what they would want to do is describe what that occasion is. It doesn't have to be Halloween. You could make it be that if you want, but it could be something, just anything related to remembering people who have gone before. It could be something related to a country doing that, or whatever happens in your community. They, of course, would want to include all the details of what goes on there. Usually food, music, and so forth are a part of a celebration like that. They would want them to feel comfortable with anything that they were going to now experience, especially if you thought that that was going to be radically different from their own culture. Then the key thing is, what I've been learning is the students that we have in our classes now, we need to give them options. We need to say, now, your task is to create the invitation, but how will you do that? Do you and your group want to make a video? Do you want to make a video presentation? Do you want to create a poster or create that into a letter and that type of thing? And give them some options on how they would actually then do that presentation of their stations activity. So that's how you might take any cultural experience that you've had, divide it into a lot of resources, and then bring it all together in one step. All right. So I'm going to go back to Adam again. Adam, we asked for people to continue to share resources that they use, maybe the levels that they use them with, and then also anything. And here I've gone quickly through a lot, so I'm hoping that there were maybe some resources that caught people's attention. Let me turn it back to you, Adam.
Great. Thank you so much, Rich. We did cover quite a lot in this 45 minutes. I wanted to say that before you got to it, somebody said that they read the novel Tumba in class.
Cool.
they, some other attendees mentioned about, the comparison and contrast with the Halloween holiday here, because that is such a prevalent and obvious, right, and happening at the same time. So the last one that we had was the PBS Dia de los Muertos video.
Oh,
so I suppose there's probably a longer special or some sort of, video that covers the holiday in more depth. Another couple of questions, are about, balancing English and Spanish during this instruction, right? Are you doing your instruction in Spanish, but reflection in English? How are you balancing that out, and how might that change, like, by the level of the class?
yeah, great question. We even dealt with that in the writing of Auténtico, that what we have tried to do, and what I would encourage people to do, first of all, earlier in the webinar, I talked about the idea that, if possible, can you use sentence frames? Can you use the simplicity of a few words to have them think about that? And often that requires them maybe having some specific vocabulary to the cultural event that you're talking about. Like in this case, we talked about calaveras, la muerte, difuntos, words like that. If you can then create sentence frames, that's a beginning point. Again, I think the task often will dictate that. If your task requires a fairly deep level of understanding in a level 1 class, that may only be they may only be able to do that in English. One of the things that I've tried to work toward is recognizing how much maybe in the past I would have presented to my class in English, that actually now a lot of that can be done in Spanish, with a lot of scaffolding of that, a lot of help and so forth. So I guess where I've gotten as a teacher is I'm trying to use more, but I don't see it as an either or. I see that there are times that there may be really good, deep insights that need to be in English, but I'm trying to bring as much Spanish in as possible. So hopefully that doesn't sound too wishy-washy, but I think that's probably where a lot of our teachers are, is recognizing that.
Right, and probably applying, what they know from their students in their classroom, right? There were a couple of more ideas from one of our attendees, Nicole, who teaches about butterfly migration through videos and a short reading. And was also mentioning about perhaps using infographics on altars, and how that's incorporated into the holiday celebration. Another question that came up was about the stations activity, right? Like, how time intensive would that be as you're planning, your week?
So I will admit it is a fairly time intensive type thing. So this is, I taught in a typical year for me at the high school where I taught, I might have 2 or 3 Spanish 3 classes. So that allowed me to create a stations activity and to do it with 3 different classes. But it is somewhat time intensive. So sometimes what I would do is I would maybe plan it out over a week's period of time that they were going to be doing their stations, but maybe in each day we had some instructional part of the lesson where I was taking them to some other concepts of vocabulary or grammar or whatever was needing to be. And then maybe there would be a portion of each of the lessons that would then be, okay, ahora vamos a las estaciones. And then they would go to their stations, whichever one they hadn't been to from the previous days. And they would, again, be keeping all of their thoughts together. But it is one that's time intensive. So it's not the kind of thing that I'm doing every week. It's not even the kind of thing I'm doing every thematic unit. It's probably the kind of thing that I'm picking in a semester or in a year. What are some of the real cultural events, cultural ideas that I want to explore with them? And then maybe it's once each semester or twice in a semester, or whatever allows you to do, because you have a lot of other things that you're accomplishing. So I think it's a great thing. I don't want in any way to set this expectation of, yeah, you ought to be doing this every week, because that would be very time intensive. And it takes a lot on your part to put it all together. Now, the nice thing is, once you put it all together, you get to stand back and move through the class and enjoy the students experiencing it. But it's work on your part to get it all together.
Okay, great. No, thank you, Rich. There were just a couple more comments that came in. Somebody wrote that stations are a really engaging way to facilitate meaningful learning for secondary students. So they second that. They highly recommend it. And another teacher, Nicole, shared a kite project where students make their own mini kites to loved ones who have passed and write messages in Spanish as they do in Guatemala for Dia de los Muertos.
Yeah, see, that's the perfect example. I love that, and I did read about that being an occasion in or a celebration in Guatemala. So that's why, again, I think it's really cool to be able to bring in other types of things. And maybe what it is again, students often go for 2 or 3 levels of Spanish within our schools or our school system, and so maybe you kind of intentionally have this thing with your other teachers that in level 1 we're going to do this, but then let's explore different depths or different countries or something. I think that's a great way to do that.
Excellent. One more comment came in. Somebody suggested, what if, if you're doing a stations activity, that students can earn, a stamp or a sticker as they sort of pass through the stations and have their completed, passport at the end as a piece of motivation.
I love that. Yep.
That's all we had from the audience. I also
great. Well, Adam, I'm going to let you continue to talk to the group because I think this next slide is one that many of them may want to hear about also.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rich. We did want to touch on, the fact that, as we think about using authentic resources and engaging with students in the classroom as we move toward the higher levels and in advanced placement, we wanted to share that we have a new edition of the AP Spanish Preparing for the Language and Culture Exam workbook available from Jose Diaz, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with him as a Savas author and as a former teacher and grader and being heavily involved with the College Board in reviewing and grading the exams. So this is available now. So if you're interested in a sample of the workbook or interested in bringing this into your classroom, we have a QR code that you can scan here, and a number of you have asked for a copy of the presentation. So we'll try to include a PDF of this presentation for all of you as we send out the recording later this week. So if you are interested, you could scan this QR code now, or when we share that PDF later, you can scan it then and complete a form for more information on this brand new workbook. So just wanted to make you aware of that as well. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, as Rich did throughout the presentation, that most of these examples that he's shared are somehow related to Auténtico, which is a levels A, B, 1, 2, and 3 Spanish program. So if you are interested in Auténtico and more information about that, we will also share a link with you so that you can pursue, and get samples of that program if you'd like them to evaluate for your classroom. So thank you everybody for joining today. Definitely want to thank Rich for sharing your insight and your ideas and activities with us. We really appreciate that. I think it's really nice to have this timely webinar and get people ready for integrating this lesson into classroom if they would like. Again, everybody who's attended today and anybody who registered will receive a link to the recording in a follow-up email, and we'll have it on demand on the savas.com website soon. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Rich, for presenting, and hope you have a great day. Muchas gracias.